Hello and welcome. Today we're diving head first into a really tough issue, one where a country's own laws are starting to look like they're on a collision course with the global rules of war. It's a fascinating and, frankly, pretty troubling story about one law that's kicking up a huge international debate. And to really get a sense of how serious this is, just listen to this statement from Dr. Mohammed Mahmoud Maran, who's a professor of international law. It's a heavy accusation, and it cuts right to the very core of this whole controversy. Okay, so let's get right into it. The center of this whole storm is a new law making its way through Israel's Knesset. And this isn't just some minor legal tweak. We're talking about a law that could totally change the game for how certain prisoners are treated. So let's break down what's actually in this thing. The proposed law would allow for the execution of prisoners for committing hostile acts. But it also does a few other things. It gets rid of the need for a unanimous vote from judges to issue a death sentence. And it slams the door on any chance of a pardon or a lesser sentence. Now, according to the sources we've looked at, critics are arguing that this whole law is specifically designed to target Palestinian prisoners. This just begs the question, right? How does a law like this stack up against the rules that, the rest of the world has already agreed on for wartime? To figure that out, we need to zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture of how war is supposed to be fought. So let's talk about that global rulebook. It's a body of law officially known as International Humanitarian Law, or IHL for short. Think of it as the foundational set of rules for how to behave during an armed conflict. Honestly, the best way to think about IHL is just that. It's the official rulebook for conflict. These are the lines that countries have all agreed not to cross, even when they're at war with each other. It's all about trying to hold on to some basic level of humanity, even in the worst possible circumstances. And this rulebook wasn't just invented overnight. Nope, it's been built up piece by painful piece over more than 150 years. It all started way back in 1864 with rules to protect wounded soldiers. Then, after World War I, it expanded to cover prisoners of war. And then, after the absolute horrors of World War II, the whole thing was basically rebuilt from the ground up in 1949. This is a system that was literally born out of global catastrophe. So here's a really key point. What even is a prisoner of war? Well, under the Geneva Conventions, a POW is usually a soldier captured by the enemy. And this is crucial. Holding them isn't meant to be a punishment. The entire idea is just to keep them from returning to the fight. That's it. It's a preventative measure. And because it's not about punishment, that leads to a whole set of fundamental rights. Prisoners of war have to be treated humanely, always. They have to be protected from violence, from threats, and even from being put on display. They have a right to food, shelter, and medical care. And, this is a big one, if they're accused of a crime, they have the right to a fair trial in a proper court. Okay, so we've got the global rules down. Now let's put them right next to this proposed law and see where they just don't line up. This is really where the rubber meets the road on this whole issue. And wow, when you see it side by side, the clash is obvious. The Geneva Conventions say detention is preventative. This new law introduces execution as a punishment. International law demands a fair trial in an independent court. This law uses military courts, which critics argue are biased. The conventions demand humane treatment for everyone without exception. Experts in our sources say this law is designed from the ground up to be applied discriminatorily. Now, to put this all into perspective, we're not just talking about abstract legal theory here. According to the sources we're looking at, which are from March 2026, there are over 10,000 Palestinian prisoners currently in Israeli detention. So a law like this could have very real life or death consequences for a huge number of people. So you might be asking, why should I care about one law in one country? Well, it matters because this whole thing is sparking a much, much bigger conversation about the future of international law, period. Legal experts are sounding all kinds of alarms. They're saying this chips away at the entire system of IHL that's been built since the 1800s. They also point to the Hague regulations, which say an occupying power can't just change the local laws. Others are calling it a form of collective punishment, which is flat out illegal. And again, you have Dr. Marian, who goes even further, calling it discriminatory and a form of apartheid. And this right here is the biggest fear, summed up perfectly in this quote from Dr. Mehran. The real worry isn't just about this one instance. It's that other countries in other conflicts down the road will just point to this and say, well, they did it, so why can't we? It sets a dangerous precedent. So, at the end of the day, it all comes down to this. The rules that protect prisoners of war are only as strong as the world's willingness to follow them. And the fear is that if one country decides to go its own way, the whole system, which was so carefully built, could just start to unravel for everyone. So with stakes this high, you can bet the international community has had a lot to say. Let's take a look at the different calls for action this proposed law has set off around the world. And the reaction has been coming from all over. You've got major European powers like the UK, France, and Germany basically telling Israel to ditch the bill. The Arab League is going a step further, calling it a potential war crime and demanding international protection for prisoners. And then you have the legal experts and human rights groups who are calling for the big guns, like the UN and the ICC, to step in. And these aren't just empty words either. People are suggesting very specific, very powerful actions. They're pushing the International Criminal Court to actually issue arrest warrants. They want the UN Human Rights Council to hold an emergency meeting. And some are even floating the idea of sanctions to force compliance with international law. And that sense of urgency, well, it's captured in this final, pretty stark quote from Dr. Miran. The argument he's making is that for the rest of the world, just staying quiet isn't a neutral option. In a situation like this, he argues silence is the same as being complicit. Which brings us to our final big picture question. This whole situation is about more than just one law and one country. It really forces all of us to ask, what happens to that global rulebook when a nation decides it wants to tear out a page and write its own rules? What are the consequences for everyone when the very foundations of the game are challenged? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me.